My husband's attorney stopped mid-sentence. He'd been reading through the final paperwork, the stack of documents that was supposed to make his client the winner of our 15-year marriage, and something on page 37 made him stop breathing. He grabbed Marcus by the arm. Not politely. Not professionally. He grabbed him the way you grab someone who's about to step in front of a bus. He leaned in and whispered something. I couldn't hear the words from across the table, but I could see Marcus's face. I'd been watching that face across dinner tables and living rooms and company events for a decade and a half. I knew every expression it was capable of making. Confidence. Charm. Condescension. That particular smile he used when he thought he was the smartest person in the room. I'd never seen the expression that crossed it now. The color left his skin in stages. First the cheeks, then the forehead, then all the way down to his neck. His hands, the ones that had been reaching for the pen like a man collecting a trophy, started trembling so badly that the documents shook against the table. The sound of paper rattling was the only sound in the room. And me, sitting in my navy dress with my hands folded in my lap, looking exactly like the broken, beaten-down woman everyone in that courtroom expected me to be, I smiled. Small. Brief. Just for myself. But I'm starting at the end. And this story only works if you understand the beginning. How a woman everyone had already written off played the quietest, longest, most patient game of her life. How she let them all believe she'd lost. And how she walked out of a courthouse carrying the only thing that actually mattered while her husband inherited the disaster he'd built with his own hands and begged for in writing. My name is Serena Caldwell. I'm 35 years old. And until 4 months ago, I was married to Marcus Webb. 16 years. That's longer than some careers. Longer than most friendships. And about 14 years longer than my dignity should have allowed. But I'm a patient woman. I get that from my grandmother. And patience, as it turns out, is the most dangerous weapon a person can carry because nobody sees it coming. I met Marcus when I was 17. I'd finished high school a year early, not because I was some kind of prodigy, but because I was focused and practical and deeply, urgently motivated to become a person who didn't depend on anyone for anything. I got a job as a file clerk at Brannigan and Associates, a mid-sized law firm in downtown Ashfield. Minimum wage, brutal hours, paper cuts on 9 out of 10 fingers, but it was mine. I earned it. I showed up every morning at 7:30, and I didn't leave until the work was done. By 18, I'd moved up to legal assistant. I was good with details, good with numbers, and very good at keeping my mouth shut while keeping my eyes wide open. Those skills would save my life later, though I didn't know it yet. Marcus was 25 when he walked into a client reception at the firm. Dark suit, confident stride, the kind of man who enters a room and immediately rearranges the gravity so that everything tilts slightly toward him. He was building a commercial real estate development company. Had 3 projects in early stages, a business plan he could recite from memory, and a way of talking about the future that made it sound like a place he'd already been to and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. He told me he was going to build something extraordinary. I told him I could help him file the incorporation documents. He laughed. 3 months later, he proposed. We got married when I was 19. Our son, Caleb, arrived when I was 21. I kept working at the law firm part-time, kept building my retirement account, kept putting money away in the quiet, steady, unglamorous way that nobody notices and nobody applauds. My grandmother used to say, a smart woman keeps her own money. Not hidden money, Serena. Just her own. Something that has only your name on it. Something nobody can reach. Grandma Rosalind said that to me every single time I saw her from the time I was 12 years old until the day she died. I thought she was being dramatic. She wasn't. She was being prophetic. When I was 24, Marcus's company finally gained traction. 3 developments closed in the same quarter. Cash flow went from a trickle to a river. He asked me to quit the law firm and come work for him full-time. He said he needed someone he could trust completely. Someone to manage the books, handle the contractors, coordinate with clients, keep the entire machine running while he stood at the front and smiled for the cameras. So I became his unpaid everything. Bookkeeper. Office manager. client coordinator, marketing strategist, event planner, model home decorator. I sourced materials and negotiated vendor contracts and tracked every line item in every budget while also raising our son, managing our household, cooking our meals, scheduling his dentist appointments, remembering his mother's birthday, and somehow keeping everyone functioning at a level that appeared effortless because I was very, very good at making impossible things look easy. My official title was wife. My actual job description would have required 3 full-time salaries. For 12 years, I poured myself into building Marcus Webb's dream. His company, his reputation, his legacy. And for 12 years, he received the credit. The industry awards went on his shelf. The magazine profiles featured his face. The client testimonials praised his vision. At every gala, every fundraiser, every ribbon-cutting ceremony, I was Marcus's wife. Not Serena, the woman who balanced the books and caught the errors and made sure the whole operation didn't collapse under the weight of its own ambition. Just the wife, standing slightly behind him, smiling on cue. At every celebration, he'd thank his team, his mentors, his investors. He'd thank the city of Ashfield for believing in his vision. He'd thank the good Lord above. Somehow, he never quite got around to thanking the woman who'd been in his office until midnight reconciling accounts, while he was out entertaining clients at restaurants I was never invited to. Somewhere along the way, things shifted. He started making decisions without consulting me. Started coming home later. Started picking at things, small things, the way I wore my hair, the meals I prepared, the fact that I'd gained 7 pounds since Caleb was born. He called it letting herself go. I called it being a human person who worked 18-hour days for free. Then, about 2 years in, the criticism evolved. It became philosophical. Sweeping. You just don't have any ambition, Serena. You're comfortable being small. You don't want more for yourself. No ambition. I was running his entire back office without a paycheck while raising his child and keeping his world organized down to the minute. But sure, no ambition. Then 4 months ago, on a Wednesday evening, he dropped the bomb. I was in the kitchen, making his favorite dinner, actually. Braised short ribs. 3 hours of preparation for a meal he'd eat in 12 minutes without commenting on the flavor. But I made it because that's what I did. That's who I'd become. The woman who made the short ribs and asked for nothing and expected even less. He walked in, set his briefcase on the counter, sat down at the kitchen table with this expression on his face that I'd never seen before. Not sad. Not apologetic. Not conflicted. Transactional. The face of a man about to close a deal. I want a divorce, he said. And I want the house, the business, the cars. Everything. You can keep Caleb. He said it like he was placing an order at a restaurant. I'll have the assets, hold the child, thanks. You can keep Caleb. Like our 16-year-old son was a leftover. An afterthought. An item being graciously allowed to remain with me because Marcus had no use for it. I just looked at him. 16 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. At our kitchen table, between the salt shaker and the butter dish, while the short ribs cooled on the stove. Like I was just another line item he was writing off. What I didn't know in that moment, what I wouldn't learn until the pieces started falling into place over the following days, was that Marcus had been planning this for months. He already had a lawyer. A man named Gregory Ashburn, senior partner at a firm that charged $600 an hour and specialized in making sure wealthy men stayed wealthy after divorcing the women who'd helped make them that way. Marcus had been building his exit strategy while I was meal prepping his lunches and scheduling his annual physical. I'd been blindsided by the man I'd trusted with everything. Or at least, that's what he thought. The next morning, his mother arrived. Audrey Webb. A woman who had treated me like the hired help for 16 years while I hosted her holiday dinners, drove her to her appointments, and listened to her opinions about everything from my cooking to my posture to the way I was raising her grandson. Audrey showed up with her hair freshly set and her sympathy face perfectly calibrated. She sat down at my kitchen table and patted my hand the way you'd pat a dog that doesn't know it's about to be dropped at the shelter. You should have tried harder, Serena. Men have needs. If you'd been more attentive, more present, she searched for the word, exciting, maybe things would have turned out differently. Audrey's advice on maintaining a marriage was always fascinating, given that her own husband had spent the last 15 years of his life on a fishing boat specifically to avoid being in the same room as her. But sure, I was the problem. That first week was a blur. Marcus moved me to the guest room. Had his lawyer draft preliminary settlement terms. Had timelines drawn up, property divisions proposed, everything organized and moving at speed. His speed. His terms. His timeline. Everyone saw what they expected to see. A wife being discarded after 16 years of service. A woman whose world had just been pulled out from under her. A victim who didn't see it coming and didn't know how to fight back. But here's the thing. What Marcus didn't know. What his lawyer didn't know. What his mother and his girlfriend and every single person who looked at me with pity during those first weeks didn't know. I had found something 3 years earlier. Something buried in his own financial records. Something he believed was hidden so deep that no one would ever find it. And I'd been quietly, meticulously, patiently preparing ever since. Before I tell you what I found and how I used it, if this story is connecting with you, if you're already invested in what happens next, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit like and subscribe. But only if it genuinely earns it. Wait until the end if you want to. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one, and it means more than you know to hear from the people who stay with me through the whole thing. Now, back to the disaster. Within a week of the announcement, Marcus had completely seized control. The guest room became my permanent residence in what used to be my home. My closet shrank from a walk-in to a single rack of hangers he generously allowed me to keep. Half my clothes were boxed up and put in the garage. The message was clear and deliberate. This isn't your house anymore. You're a guest here, and your invitation is expiring. Within 2 weeks, he started bringing her around. Megan Alcott, 28 years old, worked in the marketing department of his company. Of course she did. She had that curated, filtered, algorithm-approved look, highlighted hair, lash extensions, workout clothes that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and a confidence that comes from not yet understanding what you've walked into. She walked into my kitchen like she'd already been given the keys. Opened my refrigerator. Used my blender. Wore my grandmother's apron, the one with the blue flowers that Grandma Rosalind had sewn herself, the one I'd kept for 17 years, while making a green smoothie and laughing at something on her phone. She was younger than my marriage. Younger than most of my furniture. But she made excellent smoothies, so I suppose that counts for something. Marcus paraded her through my house like he was giving a museum tour. They'd sit on my couch, watch my television, eat off my dishes. He'd put his arm around her right in front of me, right in front of our son, like I was a piece of furniture that hadn't been picked up during the renovation. Like I'd already disappeared and just hadn't had the courtesy to become invisible yet. The humiliation escalated daily. First, he canceled my personal credit card. We need to separate our finances, he said, deploying his reasonable voice, the one that made control sound like common sense. Then the joint card. Then he suggested that I should probably find somewhere else to stay while we sort things out. My own home. And I was being invited to leave it. Audrey came over to help me pack. By help, I mean she went through my belongings and appointed herself the judge of what I deserved to keep. Old clothes, fine. Family photographs, some of them. My grandmother's recipe box, the wooden one with the brass clasp, the one Rosalind kept for 40 years, the one she left to me specifically in her will. Audrey held it in her hands and turned it over with this appraising look, like she was considering whether it was valuable enough to claim. I took it from her without a word. What I was not allowed to take. Any jewelry Marcus had bought me over 16 years. Any furniture I'd selected or purchased. Anything of material value. Those were marital assets, Audrey explained, as though she'd recently passed the bar exam. And Marcus was entitled to them. She packed my things in garbage bags. Not boxes. Not suitcases. Garbage bags. Black, plastic garbage bags, the kind you put on the curb on Tuesday mornings for the truck to take away. Through all of this, I had one person I thought I could trust. Vanessa Caldwell. No relation. Same last name, different universe. We'd been friends since high school. 21 years of friendship. Through bad boyfriends and worse haircuts and babies and job losses and everything else that life throws at women who are trying their best. She was the first person I called after Marcus's announcement. She was so supportive. Always texting. Always checking in. Always showing up with wine and tissues and her shoulder ready for my tears. She told me I deserved better. She told me Marcus was making the biggest mistake of his life. She told me to stay strong. But something felt off. Small things. Things I might not have noticed if I hadn't spent 3 years learning to watch closely. Marcus seemed to know my plans before I made them. When I mentioned to Vanessa that I was thinking about fighting for the house, Caleb came home the next day and said Dad told him that wasn't going to happen. When I told Vanessa I was looking at apartments in the Millbrook neighborhood, Marcus made a comment 2 days later about Millbrook being too expensive for someone in my situation. Then it clicked. And looking back, I should have seen it years ago. The way Vanessa always brightened when Marcus entered a room. The way she complimented him just a shade too specifically, too warmly. The way she laughed at his jokes with her whole body. The way she always asked about him first whenever we talked. How's Marcus? How's the company? Is Marcus happy? 21 years of friendship. And she'd been carrying a torch for my husband through every single one of them. And Marcus, because he collected admiration the way other men collect watches, knew exactly how to use her. He made her feel special. Important. Not like other women. He probably dropped just enough hints about them having a future together to keep her loyal. Just enough warmth to keep her feeding him information. My best friend was his spy. 21 years of history, traded for some flattery and an implied promise from a man who'd never kept a promise in his life. At least charge more, Vanessa. Your rate was embarrassingly low. But the worst part of all of it, worse than Marcus, worse than Audrey, worse than Vanessa, was Caleb. My son saw everything. Saw the girlfriend making smoothies in his mother's kitchen. Saw his grandmother packing his mother's clothes in garbage bags. Saw the way his father looked at me like I was an obstacle to be removed from the floor plan of his new life. And Marcus was working on him. Dripping poison in his ear day after day with the patient, calibrated precision of a man who'd spent his career selling people things they didn't need. Your mom is making this harder than it has to be. I'm just trying to do what's best for everyone. She's the one dragging things out. I want to be fair, but she won't let me. Caleb started pulling away from me. Not with anger. With distance. The confused, uncertain distance of a teenager who doesn't know which parent to believe and whose father is very, very good at sounding reasonable. I could lose the house. I could lose the money. I could lose everything I'd spent 16 years building. But watching my son look at me like I was the problem. That was the cut that actually drew blood. That was the wound that kept me awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, holding my grandmother's recipe box against my chest. I hired a lawyer. Grace Pelletier. A referral from my old firm. 54 years old, 27 years in family law, a mind like a steel trap and absolutely zero patience for theatrics. She reviewed my situation, reviewed the preliminary settlement terms Marcus had proposed, and laid out the battle plan. You helped build this company, she said. You're entitled to half of everything. The house, the business, the accounts. We file a counterclaim, and we fight for every dollar. I looked at her for a long moment. What if I don't want to fight? Grace stared at me like I'd just suggested we resolve the divorce through interpretive dance. She thought I was broken. Defeated. Too beaten down by 16 years of emotional erosion to stand up for myself. She had no idea. I moved into a small apartment with Caleb. 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom. A kitchen the size of a closet. Half our boxes didn't fit and ended up stacked in the corner of the living room like a skyline of everything we'd lost. Meanwhile, Marcus posted photos with Megan. New chapter, blessed, he wrote under a picture of the two of them at a rooftop restaurant, city lights behind them, her head on his shoulder. Audrey commented underneath. So proud of you, sweetheart. You deserve happiness. As if happiness was something he'd earned through hard work rather than something he'd stolen from someone else. My sister called, furious. You need to go to war, Serena. Take him for everything he has. Hire the most expensive lawyer in the state and drain him dry. Everyone had advice. Everyone had opinions. Everyone thought they knew what I should do. Everyone saw a woman who'd given up, who couldn't fight, who was watching her husband walk away with everything and doing nothing about it. Everyone was wrong. Here's the thing about being underestimated. When people decide you're no threat, they stop watching you. They stop being careful with what they say around you. They stop guarding their secrets. They stop locking their doors. And that's precisely when you learn everything you need to know. 3 years. That's how long I'd been carrying this secret. That's how long I'd known the truth about Marcus Webb and his magnificent, impressive, completely fraudulent empire. It started on an ordinary Thursday night 3 years before the divorce. Marcus was working late again. He was always working late by then, though I didn't yet understand what working late really meant. I was at the kitchen table, going through the company's quarterly financials, reconciling accounts, doing the tedious, invisible work that kept his business running while he was out somewhere being impressive. And I found something that didn't belong. A transfer to an account I didn't recognize. $6,000 moved 4 days earlier to a bank I'd never seen in any of our records. I kept looking. Found another. Then another. Then a pattern emerged, like shapes appearing in fog. Money flowing out of accounts I managed and into places I'd never seen, through channels I hadn't set up, in amounts that were individually unremarkable but collectively massive. I stayed up until 4 in the morning following the trail. And what I found made the room tilt. Marcus had been borrowing against everything we owned. Everything. The house. Our beautiful house on Ashworth Drive. The one with the wraparound porch, and the kitchen I'd designed, and the garden I'd planted with Caleb when he was 7. The house everyone admired. The house I thought we owned free and clear. It had 3 mortgages on it. The original loan, $420,000. A second mortgage of $375,000, taken out 5 years earlier without my knowledge. A third mortgage of $360,000, taken out 3 years before I found it. Total owed on the house, $1.15 million. Market value, approximately $870,000. We were underwater by nearly $300,000 on a home I thought was paid off. The business was worse. Lines of credit maxed out at $220,000. Back taxes owed to the IRS, $93,000. Vendor debts, $135,000. Equipment leases, $80,000 with balloon payments approaching. The company Marcus bragged about at every dinner party, the company he wore like a crown, was drowning in nearly $500,000 of debt. Even the cars weren't real. The Range Rover, the Mercedes, the vintage Porsche he kept in the garage and drove on Sundays with the top down like a man without a care in the world, every single one was leased. Balloon payments coming due within 18 months. We didn't own anything. We just had very expensive monthly obligations and a lifestyle built on the financial equivalent of tissue paper. I sat at that kitchen table at 4 in the morning, surrounded by printouts, and I did the math. Total debt, approximately $2.1 million. Total actual asset value, maybe $1.7 million. And that was generous. We were $400,000 in the hole. Maybe more, depending on which way the market moved. But where had the money gone? $2.1 million in debt doesn't accumulate from ordinary business expenses. The company was generating revenue. Significant revenue. Where was it disappearing to? I kept digging. Over the following weeks, working at night after Marcus went to bed, I traced every transaction I could access. And the picture that assembled itself was devastating. Cryptocurrency investments. $230,000. Lost. Every penny of it, sunk into speculative positions that had collapsed. Gambling. $110,000. An online poker account I never knew existed and a trail of wire transfers to 3 different casinos. An apartment. A 2-bedroom condo in Millbrook that I'd never heard of, rented under the company name, furnished with company funds. $67,000 in rent and furnishings over 2 years. Rented for a woman whose name appeared on exactly 1 utility bill that I found buried in a company account statement. Lifestyle expenses that never made it home. Watches. Suits. Dinners at restaurants I'd never been to. Weekend trips to places I wasn't invited. Another 95,000. My husband wasn't building an empire. He was building an illusion. A hologram of success projected over a pit of debt so deep that light couldn't reach the bottom. We looked wealthy the same way a movie set looks like a real city, convincing from one angle and completely hollow if you walked around back. My first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to throw the printouts in his face and demand an explanation, to watch him try to talk his way out of numbers that don't negotiate. But I knew Marcus. I'd watched him operate for 16 years. I'd seen how he handled challenges, how he redirected blame, how he transformed his own mistakes into someone else's fault with the fluid skill of a man who'd been doing it his entire life. If I confronted him, he'd manipulate me. He'd explain it away. He'd make me feel crazy for questioning him. He'd probably find a way to make it my fault. You were supposed to be watching the books, Serena. How did you let this happen? And worse, if he knew I knew, he might come for my separate money. Because I had separate money. Grandma Rosalind's voice in my head, every day, every year, for as long as I could remember. A smart woman keeps her own. My retirement account from my years at Brannigan and Associates. I'd rolled it over when I quit, but I'd never touched it, never merged it with our joint finances, never let Marcus's name anywhere near it. By the time I discovered the debt, it had grown to $205,000. Mine. Legally, provably, separately mine. Earned before the marriage and maintained independently throughout. And then there was Grandma Rosalind herself. She'd passed away when I was 29. Lung cancer. Slow enough that she had time to get her affairs in order, which she did with the same quiet thoroughness she'd applied to everything in her life. She left me $380,000. Her will was specific. Pointed. Almost defiant. This money is for Serena alone. Not for joint use. Not for shared investment. For Serena. I'd kept it in a separate account for 6 years. Never commingled it with a single dollar of Marcus's money. Never used it for household expenses or business costs or any purpose that could blur the legal line between his money and mine. I kept it exactly the way Grandma Rosalind kept hers. In her own name. In her own account. Under her own control. My grandmother kept her own money for 53 years. Not because she didn't trust her husband. Because she understood that trust and preparation aren't opposites. They're neighbors. Between the IRA and the inheritance, I had roughly $585,000 that was completely, legally, unquestionably mine. Money Marcus had never seen, never touched, never knew the full scope of. So I didn't confront him. Instead, I did what my grandmother would have done. I protected what mattered and I prepared for what was coming. I contacted my uncle, Philip, a retired forensic accountant who'd spent 31 years untangling financial fraud for the state comptroller's office. I told him everything. He drove 3 hours to sit at my kitchen table and go through the records line by line. When he finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He's built a bomb, Serena. And he's sitting on top of it. I know. What are you going to do? I'm going to let him light the fuse himself. Uncle Philip helped me set up an irrevocable trust for Caleb. My IRA and my inheritance went in. My name wasn't on it as a beneficiary. Marcus's name was nowhere near it. It was for Caleb's future. College, a first home, emergencies, whatever he'd need to build a life. And it was untouchable. Legally walled off. A fortress built from my grandmother's money and my grandmother's wisdom. Then I documented everything. Every mortgage document. Every hidden account. Every suspicious transfer. Every gambling receipt. Every line of credit. Every lie that had a paper trail. I printed copies and stored them at my sister's house in a fireproof box. I put a second set in a safe deposit box at a bank Marcus had never used. I saved everything on an encrypted drive that I kept in the lining of a suitcase in the back of my closet. And then I waited. I knew Marcus would leave eventually. Men like him always do. They get bored, or they find someone younger, or they decide they've outgrown the woman who built their life for them. It was just a matter of time and trigger. I just had to be ready when it happened. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of watching him dig the hole deeper while I smiled across the dinner table and asked about his day. 3 years of playing the role of the trusting wife while cataloging every new lie, every new debt, every new layer of fraud he was adding to the structure. I got very good at patience. I got very good at pretending I didn't know that my husband was financially incinerating our lives. So when Marcus finally sat me down at that kitchen table and demanded the divorce, when he looked me in the eye and said he wanted the house, the business, the cars, everything, I almost laughed. Not almost. I did laugh, but only on the inside. He wasn't asking for assets. He was demanding debt. A mountain of it. He just didn't know it yet. He was begging to inherit a catastrophe and signing his name to the request. Back in the present, I sat across from Grace Pelletier and placed 3 binders on her desk. 3 years of evidence. Every mortgage document, every loan statement, every hidden account, every transaction, every trace of every dollar that had disappeared into Marcus Webb's black hole of ego and recklessness. Grace read in silence for almost an hour. She didn't speak. She didn't react. She just turned pages with the slow, methodical focus of a woman who's seen a lot of bad situations and has just realized this one isn't what she thought it was. When she finally looked up, her face had completely changed. The concern was gone. The protective, maternal worry she'd been wearing since our first meeting was gone. What replaced it was something sharper. Something that looked a lot like respect. You've known about this for 3 years. Yes. You've been waiting for him to file. I've been waiting for him to demand everything. There's a difference. She looked at the binders. Then at me. Then at the binders again. So when you sign over the assets, she said slowly, working through it, you walk away clean. He gets the mortgages, the business debts, the lease obligations. All of it becomes his sole responsibility. Yes. And your inheritance. Your retirement account. Separate property. Never commingled. Legally protected. Sitting in an irrevocable trust for my son. Grace was quiet for a long moment. She closed the top binder. Opened it again. Closed it. Then she smiled. Not a warm smile. A precise one. The smile of a woman who appreciates architecture. Mrs. Caldwell, she said, I owe you an apology. I thought you'd given up. I smiled back. Everyone thinks that. That's the whole point. Grace went from looking at me like a woman who needed rescuing to looking at me like a woman who'd been building a chess position for 3 years and was about to call checkmate. I prefer the second look. Better posture. The trap was already built. The numbers were verified. The documentation was airtight. All I had to do was let Marcus think he was winning. And nobody on this earth does gracious loser better than a woman who's been practicing selflessness for 16 years. The next 3 months were the greatest performance of my life. I became exactly what everyone expected me to be. Broken. Defeated. Barely holding together. I showed up to mediation sessions with red eyes and trembling hands. I spoke softly. Hesitantly. The voice of a woman whose confidence had been dismantled brick by brick and who couldn't imagine fighting for herself because she'd forgotten there was a self left to fight for. I asked for so little that even the mediator seemed uncomfortable. I just want enough to start over. My voice cracked beautifully. I'm not trying to be difficult. I know the business is his life's work. I know the house means everything to him. I don't want to tear apart what's left of our family. I requested a settlement of $60,000 cash. My personal belongings. Shared custody of Caleb. That was it. Marcus agreed immediately. He was probably expecting a war. His lawyer had certainly prepared for one. Instead, I was surrendering before the first shot. He looked at me across that mediation table with something almost like pity, a wounded animal being graciously released into the wild by a hunter who considered himself merciful. I deserved every acting award in existence for that performance. Every single one. I was given the role of a lifetime, and my only audience was a lying, cheating, soon-to-be bankrupt man who thought he was watching a woman fall apart. With each passing week, Marcus's arrogance expanded. He stopped being careful. Stopped tempering his words. Started telling everyone who'd listen that I hadn't even fought. She just gave up, he told his golf partners. I offered her a fair deal and she took it without a word. No pushback. Nothing. Almost felt bad for her. Audrey was worse. She made the rounds of her social circles with the satisfied air of a woman whose predictions had been confirmed. I always said she wasn't strong enough for Marcus. She got her little settlement and walked away with her tail between her legs. My son deserved better from the start. To celebrate his imminent victory, Marcus bought himself a new watch. $18,000. I know because I saw the charge on the company credit card. He was still using business funds for personal purchases. Still adding debris to a structure that was already collapsing. He wore it to our next mediation session and made sure to check the time frequently. He also took Megan to dinner at La Maison, the French restaurant where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. He posted photos. Living my best chapter, he wrote underneath. Megan commented with 3 heart emojis. Audrey commented, "You both look wonderful." 47 people liked it. Nobody in that comments section had any idea what he actually owed. Meanwhile, Megan had started redecorating my house. New furniture in the living room. New curtains. She painted my kitchen. She painted over the terracotta accent wall I'd spent 2 weeks choosing, testing 14 different shades against the light at different times of day until I found the exact right one. She painted over it with flat gray. Builder grade, soulless, characterless gray. I spent 2 weeks on that color. She erased it in an afternoon. Gray like her death. Gray like the future she was walking into without knowing it. Fitting, really. Vanessa kept calling. Fishing for information while wearing the costume of a concerned friend. "How are you doing, Serena? Are you okay? What's the latest?" I played along perfectly. Made my voice thin. Let it shake at the right moments. "I just want it to be over, Vanessa. I can't fight anymore. I don't have anything left." Within hours, Marcus would know. I could practically feel him leaning back in his chair, relaxing, letting his guard dissolve another inch. My best friend was his intelligence network, and she didn't even know she was delivering exactly the reports I wanted him to receive. But while the adults were playing their games, Caleb was watching. And my son, my sharp, perceptive, quietly brilliant son, was starting to notice things that didn't add up. He noticed his father's new watch, but heard Marcus tell him they couldn't afford the school trip to Washington, D.C. because money was tight right now. He noticed Megan's shopping bags accumulating in the foyer, 3 and 4 at a time, designer labels, while his father lectured him about financial responsibility. He noticed the distance between the image his father was projecting and the excuses his father kept making. And at 16, Caleb was old enough to understand that distance has a name. It's called dishonesty. One evening, he came to my apartment. Sat down at my kitchen table, the second-hand table I'd bought for $30 at an estate sale, and looked at me with eyes that were too old for his face. "Mom, is Dad actually rich?" I looked at him for a long moment. "What makes you ask?" He was quiet. "Then he buys all this stuff. But then he says we can't afford things. And the house. Something about the house feels," he searched for the word, "fake. Like he's showing it off too much. People who actually have money don't show it off that much." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Trust me," I said. "Just wait a little longer." My 16-year-old had figured out the house of cards before 2 lawyers and a mediator had. I should have billed his trust fund for the consulting fee. Behind the scenes, Grace was preparing our legal strategy with the precision of a surgeon preparing an operating room. The main divorce agreement stated clearly that I was relinquishing all claims to marital property. The house, the business, the vehicles, all accounts in Marcus's name or the company's name. Everything would transfer to Marcus Webb as sole owner. In exchange, I would receive my modest cash settlement and walk away. But attached to that agreement, carefully integrated into the document package in a way that was completely legal, completely proper, and completely devastating, was an addendum. A detailed liability disclosure statement. Every debt, every mortgage, every loan, every lease obligation, every line of credit, every tax liability, everything tied to the assets Marcus was so eagerly claiming. When Marcus signed for all assets, he would be legally assuming all liabilities. The 3 mortgages would become his sole responsibility. The business debts would transfer entirely to him. The lease obligations, the vendor debts, the back taxes, everything. All of it. His name. His signature. His problem. It was all there. In black and white. In proper legal language. Disclosed, documented, and ready for his signature. Legal documents are a lot like poetry, Grace told me during one of our preparation sessions. Dense, technical, and capable of ruining someone's life. My favorite kind. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Gregory Ashburn, Marcus's attorney, called Grace with concerns. My client is assuming significant assets. I'd like to request a complete independent financial audit before we finalize. Standard due diligence. Grace kept her voice neutral, pleasant even. Of course. We're happy to provide whatever documentation you need. But when Gregory brought this to Marcus, my soon-to-be ex-husband shut it down immediately. No audits. I built that company. I know what it's worth. I'm not paying for some accountant to tell me what I already know. I want this done. Gregory pushed back. Marcus, I strongly recommend we verify the valuations before you sign. This is a significant transfer of assets. An audit protects you. No. Megan wants this finished. I want this finished. No more delays. Gregory Ashburn had been practicing family law for over 30 years. He knew when a client was about to make a catastrophic mistake. He also knew, from 3 decades of experience, that he couldn't force a grown man to take good advice. He presented Marcus with a waiver. A document acknowledging that Gregory had recommended an independent financial review and that Marcus was declining that recommendation against counsel's explicit advice. Marcus signed it without reading it. Didn't even slow down. Just grabbed the pen and scrawled his name and pushed the paper back across the desk so he could get back to whatever was more important, which, knowing Marcus, was probably texting Megan about dinner reservations. Never underestimate the power of an impatient girlfriend to make a man skip the fine print. Megan's contribution to my legal strategy was incalculable. She was worth more to me than any attorney I could have hired. The night before the hearing, Marcus sent me a text. Thanks for not making this ugly, Serena. Means a lot. I stared at that message for a long time. 16 years of marriage. 16 years of building his business, raising his son, managing his world. And he was thanking me for not making things inconvenient for him while he discarded me. I typed back, I just want what's best for Caleb. Send. What was best for Caleb was the $585,000 sitting in an irrevocable trust with his name on it. What was best for Caleb was a mother who'd spent 3 years making sure that when the explosion came, her son would be standing safely on the other side of the blast radius. Grace called me that evening. Thursday morning, 9 a.m. final hearing before Judge Catherine Whitfield. Are you ready? I looked around my small apartment. The second-hand furniture. The boxes in the corner. The kitchen I'd painted terracotta because it reminded me of the color I'd lost. The recipe box on the shelf. My grandmother looking out from a framed photograph beside it. I've been ready for 3 years. If you've made it this far, you can feel what's coming. Do me a favor. Hit the like button right now, and if you're not subscribed yet, this is the moment. I have more stories like this one, and you don't want to miss them. Trust me on that. Now, let's finish this. Thursday, 9 a.m. Courtroom 3. I remember every detail of that morning. The way the light came through the courtroom windows at an angle that made the dust motes visible, floating in the air like tiny witnesses. The smell of old wood and paper and floor wax. The quiet shuffle of lawyers organizing documents. The particular hush of a room where someone's life is about to change permanently. Marcus arrived first. Of course he did. He was wearing his best suit, the navy brioni I'd helped him pick out for a client event 3 years earlier, before I knew the client event was cover for a dinner with a woman I'd never met. His new watch caught the light. He shook hands with Gregory, and they stood near the defendant's table, murmuring relaxed. Marcus looked like a man arriving at an awards ceremony to collect a prize he'd already been told was his. Megan was in the hallway. Not allowed in the courtroom, but visible through the glass doors, sitting on a bench, scrolling through her phone with the serene boredom of someone who believed this was a formality. A speed bump on the way to the life she'd been promised. Audrey was in the gallery. Front row. Dressed for the occasion in a cream blazer and pearl earrings. She'd probably already made lunch reservations for the celebration afterward. When I walked in, she gave me a look. Not hostile. Worse. Pitying. The look you give someone who's already lost and doesn't have the dignity to admit it. I arrived exactly on time. Navy dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back. I looked tired. I looked thin. I looked like a woman who'd been slowly hollowed out over the course of a year and was running on nothing but obligation and caffeine. Perfect. Exactly the woman everyone expected to see. Judge Catherine Whitfield entered. Everyone rose. She was 59, silver-haired, bifocals, 28 years on the family court bench. She'd seen every version of every divorce, every trick, every lie, every performance. Nothing fazed her. She reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up. Webb versus Caldwell. Final dissolution hearing. My understanding is that the parties have reached a settlement agreement. Gregory stood first. That's correct, Your Honor. My client, Marcus Webb, is assuming all marital assets. The family residence, the commercial real estate development company, all associated vehicles and business accounts. In exchange, Mrs. Caldwell receives a cash settlement of $60,000. Grace rose beside me. We confirm, Your Honor. My client agrees to relinquish all claims to marital property and accepts the proposed settlement terms. Judge Whitfield's eyes moved to me. She studied my face for a moment, the careful study of a woman who'd spent nearly 3 decades developing the ability to detect coercion, desperation, and bad decisions dressed up as voluntary choices. Mrs. Caldwell, I need to be satisfied that you understand the full scope of what you're agreeing to today. You're relinquishing claims to substantial marital property. A home. A business you helped build. Are you certain this reflects your wishes? I kept my voice soft. Slightly unsteady. A woman holding herself together with the last threads of her composure. Yes, Your Honor. I understand. And you're entering this agreement of your own free will? No one has pressured or coerced you. No, Your Honor. I looked down at my hands. Then back up at her. I just want my husband to have everything he's asked for. I want to move forward. The judge studied me for another moment. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the weighing of her duty to protect a party who might be making a terrible deal against her obligation to respect the autonomy of an adult woman represented by competent counsel who was answering clearly and voluntarily. Very well. Let's proceed. The clerk distributed the final documents. Page after page. Legal language dense as concrete. Signature lines highlighted in yellow. Marcus signed eagerly. Barely reading. He flipped through pages the way you flip through a magazine in a waiting room, scanning for pictures, skipping the text. He wanted this done. He wanted to get back to his new life with his new girlfriend and his new freedom and his new watch. I signed slowly, deliberately. Every stroke of my pen measured and intentional. This was the moment I'd been working toward for 3 years. 1,095 days of preparation, converging on this courtroom, this table, this pen in my hand. I was going to feel every second of it. Across the courtroom, I saw Marcus glance at Audrey and smile. A quick, private smile. The smile of a man who's just won and wants his mother to see it. Audrey nodded back. Satisfied. Validated. In the hallway, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. Megan, probably. He smiled again. Meanwhile, Gregory Ashburn was doing what good lawyers do. What careful, experienced, 30-year veterans of family law do when their instincts tell them something isn't right. He was reviewing the complete document package one final time. Main agreement. Signed. Asset schedule. Signed. Settlement terms. Signed. Then he reached the addendum. Liability disclosure statement. I was watching Gregory the way a person watches the fuse on a firework. That slow, traveling spark. The breath-held moment before the sky explodes. I watched confusion cross his face. Watched him flip back a page. Then forward. Then back again. Watched him reach for his reading glasses and put them on and lean closer to the document as if proximity might change what the number said. It didn't. Gregory's face went pale. Not slightly. Completely. The color drained from his skin like water from a tub. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. He grabbed Marcus's arm. Not gently. Not with professional composure. He grabbed him with the urgency of a man watching his client step onto a landmine. He leaned in. Whispered. 5 words. I was sitting across the table. I couldn't hear them. But I could read them on his lips. You just signed for everything. Marcus turned to look at him. And I watched the impact arrive. Watched it cross his face in real time. Watched the confidence crack. Watched the color leave. Watched his hands, the hands that had been reaching for the pen like a man accepting an award, begin to tremble. The documents in front of him started shaking. The sound of paper rattling against the table was the only sound in the courtroom. I watched him read. Watched his eyes scan the numbers. House. 1.15 million owed. Market value, 870,000. Business. 528,000 in combined debts. Vehicles. 122,000 in lease obligations. Additional personal liabilities. 215,000. Total debt. Approximately $2.1 million. Net value of everything he'd just claimed sole ownership of. -400,000. He hadn't won the lottery. He'd won the bill for it. And he'd signed for it enthusiastically, in front of a judge, on the record, after waiving his right to an audit. Marcus stood up so fast his chair hit the railing behind him. The sound cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. This isn't right. His voice was loud. Tight. The voice of a man who's just realized the ground isn't where he thought it was. She hid this. This is fraud. These numbers are fabricated. Judge Whitfield's voice cut through the room like a blade. Mr. Webb, sit down. She manipulated the documents. She did this deliberately. Mr. Webb, I will not tell you again. Sit down. He sat. But his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The confident, charming, self-possessed man who'd walked into this courtroom 40 minutes ago was gone. In his place was someone I'd never seen before. Someone who looked exactly like what he was. A man watching his own empire collapse in real time and understanding, for the first time, that he was the one who'd built it on sand. Judge Whitfield looked at the documents. Then at Marcus. Then at the documents again. Mr. Webb, I'm reviewing the liability disclosure statement attached to the agreement you just signed. These are debts associated with assets in your name. Your mortgages. Your business accounts. Your lease obligations. Debts you incurred. She fixed him with a stare that had been refined over 28 years of watching people lie to her. Are you telling this court that you are unaware of your own financial obligations? Silence. Absolute silence. I watched Marcus try to formulate a response and fail. Watched him open his mouth and close it and open it again. Like a man trying to explain a broken vase he'd knocked off the shelf himself. Gregory cleared his throat. Your Honor, I should note for the record that I advised my client to conduct an independent financial review before signing. He declined that recommendation. I have a signed waiver documenting that advice and his refusal. He produced the waiver. The one Marcus had signed without reading. The one that said, in clear and specific legal language, that Gregory Ashburn had recommended a full financial audit and Marcus Webb had refused. Judge Whitfield reviewed it. Briefly. Then she set it down. So your client was advised to verify these figures. He chose not to. He signed a waiver acknowledging that choice. She looked at Marcus. Is that your signature, Mr. Webb? Long pause. The longest silence of his life. Yes. Then you assumed this risk voluntarily. And you did so with the benefit of legal counsel who explicitly warned you. Judge Whitfield's voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of sympathy, the voice of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. The agreement stands. Marcus turned to me. The desperation had broken through completely now. Every layer of charm, every shield of confidence, everything he'd built to protect himself from the consequences of his own choices, all of it was gone. You knew. His voice cracked. You knew about all of this. This whole time. I met his eyes. Calmly. Steadily. The way you look at someone when you've been waiting 3 years for this exact moment and you want to remember every detail. I was your bookkeeper for 12 years, Marcus. I knew about everything. His face went through more emotions in 5 seconds than most people experience in a month. Confusion, rage, betrayal, fear, desperation. And then the one I'd been waiting for. The one that made the 3 years of patience, the 3 years of silence, the 3 years of watching him dig his own grave and handing him a shinier shovel worth every sleepless night. Realization. The slow, sickening understanding that nobody had done this to him. That every signature was his. Every loan was his. Every mortgage, every gambling debt, every cryptocurrency loss, every dollar spent on the secret apartment, every lie, every evasion, every single brick of this financial catastrophe was something he'd built himself. I didn't trap him. I just let him lock himself inside the cage he'd already constructed. I want to withdraw the agreement. His voice was thin now. I didn't understand what I was signing. This isn't fair. Judge Whitfield looked at him. 28 years of watching men who'd made their own messes try to blame someone else for the smell. Mr. Webb, you signed documents before this court under oath, affirming that you understood and agreed to all terms. You were represented by experienced counsel. You declined additional review. Your former wife did not conceal anything. These are your debts. Your mortgages. Your obligations. She paused. The agreement is final. The gavel came down. Mrs. Caldwell, you have your settlement. Mr. Webb, you have the assets as agreed, along with all associated liabilities. This marriage is dissolved. I stood, smoothed my dress, picked up my purse. Grace collected our files. Then I looked at Marcus one last time. He was slumped in his chair. Papers scattered in front of him. His watch catching the courtroom light. His suit rumpled from the way he'd been gripping his own jacket during the last 20 minutes. Everything he'd wanted was now officially his, and the weight of it was already crushing him. You said you wanted everything except Caleb, I said. My voice was calm. Quiet. The voice of a woman who doesn't need to yell because the truth is loud enough on its own. I gave you exactly what you asked for. I walked out of that courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, I could hear Marcus's voice rising behind me, yelling at Gregory, demanding to know how this happened, threatening lawsuits, threatening appeals, threatening everything a drowning man threatens when the water reaches his chin. Gregory's responses were calm and measured. I advised you to get an audit, Marcus. I have the waiver. You signed it. You refused the review. This was your decision. Through the glass doors, I could see Megan's face changing in real time. She'd been sitting on that hallway bench waiting for the celebration to begin. Instead, she was listening to her boyfriend scream about debt and fraud and mortgages he'd apparently forgotten about. I watched her look at Marcus. Really look at him. And I watched her see something other than the successful, wealthy, confident man she'd signed up for. She was gone before I reached the elevator. Heels clicking on the marble floor. Moving fast. Phone already out. Probably calling a friend or a rideshare or whoever you call when the future you thought you were walking into just evaporated. Megan's exit from Marcus's life was faster than her entrance into his kitchen. At least she was consistent. I stepped outside into the April sunlight. The sky was unreasonably blue. The air smelled like spring and possibility and warm concrete. Somewhere behind me, inside the courthouse, my ex-husband was screaming at his lawyer about justice while the walls of his self-constructed empire collapsed on schedule. Ahead of me was a new life. Smaller. Simpler. A 2-bedroom apartment with second-hand furniture and a terracotta kitchen and a recipe box on the shelf and a grandmother's photograph watching over everything. Completely, entirely, finally mine. The collapse happened faster than even I expected. Within 2 weeks, Megan had moved out of the house. Packed her things while Marcus was at a meeting with a bankruptcy attorney. Left a note on the gray kitchen counter. This isn't what I signed up for. Good luck. The gray kitchen sat empty. Fitting. Within a month, Marcus tried to sell the house. But when you owe $300,000 more than something is worth, there are no buyers. Just banks calling about missed payments and realtors delivering reality checks and the particular silence of a phone that stopped ringing with offers. Within 2 months, the business started defaulting. Vendors filed lawsuits. The line of credit was frozen. Equipment lease companies sent demand letters. The company Marcus had spent 16 years building, the company I had spent 12 years running from the inside, was crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. Within 3 months, Marcus was sitting across from bankruptcy attorneys. The man who'd bragged about his empire at dinner parties, who'd posted photos of his success on social media, who'd worn $18,000 watches to divorce hearings, was now calculating which assets he could shield from creditors. The answer was almost none. Audrey's perfect son started calling family members asking for loans, showing up at relatives' houses with explanations and excuses, and that particular expression of a man who still believes he's the victim of someone else's actions. Nobody understood the debts. It must have been Serena's fault somehow. She must have hidden it. I was tricked. But the court records were public. The mortgage documents had his name on them. The loans had his signature. The gambling accounts, the crypto investments, the secret apartment. All traceable. All documented. All his. I heard that Audrey's Christmas newsletter that year was very brief. Marcus is exploring new opportunities. Yes, opportunities in debt restructuring. Riveting stuff. The other loose ends tied themselves off with a kind of poetic efficiency. Vanessa called me about a week after the hearing. Her voice was shaking with the particular tremor of someone who's realized they chose the wrong side. I had no idea things were this bad, Serena. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this. I thought Marcus and I thought maybe we could, I didn't respond. I let the silence sit on the line like a weight. She waited for me to fill it, to offer comfort, to give her the absolution she was looking for. I didn't. Some friendships don't deserve a second chapter. 21 years of history sold out for some flattery and a fantasy that was never going to come true. She'd traded something real for something that existed only in her imagination and in Marcus's willingness to exploit it. She tried calling 3 more times over the following weeks. Then she stopped. I imagine she's still waiting for Marcus to notice her. She'll be waiting a very long time. Audrey tried a different approach. She went through Caleb. Tell your mother I didn't know about the money problems. Tell her I'm sorry about the garbage bags. Tell her I'd like to talk. Caleb looked at his grandmother. The woman who'd packed his mother's belongings in trash bags. Who'd called his mother weak. Who'd sided with his father without asking a single question. Mom's busy building her life, he said. She doesn't have time for people who need to rewrite theirs. 16 years old. I couldn't have said it better myself. Audrey wanted forgiveness. I wanted peace. One of us got what we wanted. Caleb. My wonderful, observant, quietly brilliant son. He finally understood everything. Not because I sat him down and explained it. Not because I told him his father was a fraud. Because he figured it out himself. He saw the court documents. He heard the excuses. He watched Megan leave. Watched Audrey scramble. Watched the entire performance collapse into what it had always been, a stage set with nothing behind it. One evening, about a month after the divorce was final, he sat with me in my apartment. We were at the kitchen table. The $30 estate sale table. The one that wobbled slightly unless you put a folded napkin under one leg. Terracotta walls. Grandmother's recipe box on the shelf. A pot of soup on the stove, because soup is what you make when you want your home to feel like a home. You waited 3 years, he said quietly, looking at me with those serious eyes. You knew this whole time. And you just waited. I wanted to make sure you were protected. Whatever happened between your father and me, I needed to know you'd be okay. The trust fund. $585,000. Safe. Untouchable. His. He was quiet for a moment. Processing. 16-year-old boys process things differently than adults. They go quiet. They look at the table. They pick at the edge of a placemat. And then, when they've decided what they feel, they act. He got up, walked around the table, and hugged me. Really hugged me. Not the obligatory side hug of a teenager tolerating his mother's affection. A real hug. The kind that says I understand. The kind that says I see what you did. The kind that says I'm proud of you even though I'm 16 and those words don't come easily yet. 16-year-old boys do not voluntarily hug their mothers. The fact that mine did told me everything I needed to know. My $60,000 settlement went toward building a foundation. First month's rent, security deposit, furniture that wasn't held together with hope and duct tape. It wasn't luxury. It was stability, which is better. Luxury is a feeling. Stability is a floor beneath your feet. The trust fund stayed where it was. Caleb's future. College. Maybe a first home someday. A safety net woven from my grandmother's money and my grandmother's wisdom. Untouchable, unbreakable, and waiting for him whenever he was ready. And me. I enrolled in interior design courses at Ashfield Community College. The dream I'd put on hold at 24 when I quit my job to build someone else's empire. I was finally building my own. I started small. My first real client was a woman named Diane, 53 years old, just ending a 29-year marriage. She was standing in her empty new apartment, looking at blank walls and bare floors and a future she couldn't picture, and she asked me, "How do you start over when you don't even know where you are?" I thought about it for a moment. One room at a time. One color at a time. One decision that belongs only to you at a time. We painted her kitchen terracotta. She stood in the middle of the room when it was done and pressed her hand against the wall and cried. Happy tears, she said. The color of starting over. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Marcus showed up at my apartment. I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight. Not the healthy kind. The kind that hollows your cheeks and makes your clothes hang wrong. Dark circles under his eyes. His suit was wrinkled. The watch was gone, sold, probably, or repossessed. He looked like a man who'd walked through a storm and come out the other side with nothing but the understanding that the storm was his own making. He stood in my doorway, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt something that might have been sympathy. A flicker of the love I'd once had for this man, rising up from wherever I'd buried it, checking to see if it was still needed. It wasn't. I didn't know it was this bad, he said. His voice was stripped of everything, charm, confidence, authority. Just raw. I made mistakes. I know that now. Big ones. But I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I leaned against my door frame and looked at him. Really looked. This man I'd loved for nearly half my life. This man who'd thrown me away like something that had outlived its usefulness. This man who was now standing in my hallway wearing the consequences of his own choices and hoping I'd help him carry them. Can we talk? He said. Maybe figure something out. Maybe I could, I don't know. Maybe we could. He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't bring himself to say the actual words. Help me. After everything he'd done, after every lie and every debt and every woman and every garbage bag and every gray-painted wall, he still couldn't say the words. You asked for everything except Caleb, I said. Calmly. Without anger. Without satisfaction. Just fact. I gave you exactly what you wanted, Marcus. Serena, please. Goodbye. I closed the door. Gently. Not a slam. A click. The quiet, final sound of a woman who's done. He stood in the hallway for 12 minutes. I know because I watched through the peephole while eating ice cream. Butter pecan. My grandmother's favorite. Best show I've ever watched. 5 stars. That evening, after Caleb went to bed, I sat in my small living room and looked at the shelf. My grandmother's photograph. Her recipe box beside it. The brass clasp tarnished with age but still holding strong. Just like her. Just like me. You were right about everything, Grandma, I said quietly. Keep your own money. Know your own worth. And never let anyone make you feel small. The apartment was quiet. Not the empty, aching quiet of loneliness. The warm, full quiet of a space that belongs to you. Every paint color chosen by me. Every piece of furniture selected by me. Every decision, from the curtains to the coffee mug to the photograph on the shelf, mine. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was free. Not free from Marcus. Free from the version of myself I'd been performing for 16 years. Free from the woman who smiled when she was dismissed and cooked when she was ignored and gave everything to a man who counted it as nothing. That woman served her purpose. She kept me alive long enough to reach this moment. But she could rest now. I didn't need her anymore. I opened the recipe box. Pulled out a card. My grandmother's handwriting, faded blue ink on a yellowed index card. Rosalind's butter pecan cake. Underneath the ingredients, a note she'd added in pencil, years later, in smaller handwriting. For Serena. For when she finally has her own kitchen. I closed the box, held it against my chest. And I sat there in my own home, in my own quiet, in my own life, and let that be enough. Because it was. Thank you for staying with me through this whole thing. If it meant something to you, if you saw yourself in any part of this story, or you know someone who needs to hear it, send it to them. Sometimes the thing that changes everything isn't advice or money or a plan. Sometimes it's just knowing that someone else walked this road and came out the other side standing up. Hit like if this stayed with you. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. And if you want to hear what happened when Audrey showed up at my apartment 6 months later with an apology rehearsed and a casserole in her hands, that story is waiting for you. The link is right there in the description. I'll see you in the next one.